And welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning into Morning Live. Now, learners will now go back to school as of next Monday, the 8th of June, and not today as previously anticipated. South Africans were left confused last night when the Basic Education Department postponed a briefing that was meant to give clarity on the reopening of schools. Now, the department later sent out a statement saying that the Council of Education Ministers, or CEM, had concerns about the readiness of schools to reopen. And it's also said that some schools still not receive personal protective equipment for learners in particular. And to discuss this matter further, we're joined now by education specialist, Professor Mary Metcalfe. Professor Metcalfe, I'm hoping you can hear me. Good morning, and thanks for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina. Yes, I can hear you.
Great stuff. So, Professor, first and foremost, give us your view regarding the way things have developed around the reopening of schools. I mean, last night we had the minister postponing that media briefing, and it's at a crucial time because it would seem that most parents are still confused.
I think that what we need to focus on is building public confidence. And the stop-start confusion and the different messaging is very damaging to public trust. I think in order to build public trust, we need to make sure that all of the key people involved in the decision-making, which is not only government, but government together with the school governing body associations and together with the unions, need to all agree on what needs to be done, what is the state of readiness, and then needs to communicate to parents, to families, to the learners who themselves are distressed and confused. And that leadership needs to be not only at a national level, but at a local level. The regulations are clear that schools cannot open until they're ready. The work that needs to be done is at schools, by school governing bodies, school management teams, parents and communities working together to make sure that schools are safe.
And there seems to be a lot of confusion in that area as well, Professor Metcalfe. As late as Thursday, I received messages from chairpersons of school governing bodies asking me for direction and clarity. And I asked them, well, haven't you received circulars from your districts, from the department, to give you guidelines as to what to do? So in your view, looking at how this has literally unraveled now, the teacher unions concerned about safety of their members and, of course, of learners, and the consultations that have been taking place with all the relevant stakeholders. What's your take on all of this?
Well, the unions have done their own survey in terms of school readiness, and I understand that their response rate is very high. They've been able to assess 6,000 to 7,000 teachers in the country in the recent survey, and before that it was more than 9,000. And what those surveys from the union show is that there's huge unevenness across the country. You could do a comparison by provinces, and some provinces are lagging far behind. But even within provinces that may be doing better, there will be some districts which have not yet received the circulars. There will be schools across the country which don't have adequate water for
Your call has been placed on hold.
Right, just a break in the transmission there to Professor Metcalfe, and we're talking about the reopening of schools. Was supposed to happen today for grades 12 and 7, but that, of course, has now been postponed until the 8th of June, which is next week. However, we do have some provinces like the Western Cape saying, well, they will go ahead with the initial plan of having learners return to school today, and we are discussing all of this and, of course, the readiness, the preparedness of these schools to receive learners. Professor Metcalfe, I believe we have you back. Apologies, we just lost the connection there midstream while you were responding.
Sorry. So the union survey shows huge unreadiness. Basically, in the majority of provinces, the small number of schools, which is about 3,000, not small, which need water tanks to be delivered, haven't yet received their water tanks. There's many schools which are not yet confident in terms of having the wherewithal, the face masks, the water. But Sakina, the thing that I think isn't well understood is that having the sanitizers and having the water tanks and having the masks is only step one. Schools still have to put into place as managers the routines of readiness. How do you manage children coming into every classroom and washing their hand every time? Who's going to be putting the water in place? Who's going to be putting the soap in place? Who's going to be putting the paper towels in place? Who's going to be cleaning the surfaces? These are all management decisions that the school management team has to put into place in such a way that they work seamlessly for learners, so that you create a well-ordered environment that's not chaotic, but in which learners know and understand what they are required to do and why, and the systems are in place. So building institutional system readiness is as important as actually getting the PPEs to school. I think that we need to, as a country, slow down, take a step back, get onto the same page, and be able to communicate confidently to parents and learners who are waiting anxiously.
And just speaking of that orientation, you know, the slow reintegration back into the system, that comes with a question of resources as well, Professor Metcalfe, because if you look at the quantities, for example, of PPEs that have been dispensed to some schools, you have to then start asking questions around that as well. When we talk about the actual cleaning of the schools, how should that be done? Who should be doing that? And as you say, we see even with the press briefings that's being done by cabinet ministers, how after each speaker you have the cleansing of surfaces. So as you rightly point out, how is this going to be managed in schools? And where there is no running water, do teachers actually understand that this is not a question of putting just a dish with water stagnant and each child comes in and washes their hands?
Absolutely, Sakina, and that's why this virus is exposing and making more visible all of the inequalities in our society. We need to be able to support the schools that need to be supported with huge interventions by government. You know, Sakina, one of the things that I think is very interesting in the Minister's Gazette is that she published on the 29th, is she herself is very clear, and it's the clause 3.2. Only schools that have complied with the minimum health requirements will be allowed to open. So I don't think this question of dictating from the top a date for all schools to open is consistent with the regulations, because a school cannot open until it's ready. Now, what that means is, in terms of all of the practical problems that you've identified, the leadership at the school, together with parents and community, need to make sure that those routines are in place. And only then will they be allowed to open, which means that the department needs to assess school by school. How will they do that? They'll do that with their officials on the ground, working together with communities. Now, there's huge inequalities there as well, because in some provinces like Gauteng, there's one manager responsible for about 15 schools. In other provinces, the ratio can be as high as 30. Now, for one manager to be able to support each school and make sure that they're ready, they will not be able to get through all of those schools, particularly in geographically dispersed provinces, in a week, which means that we have to take time to get the systems in place, to build public confidence at local level through involving the community, and understanding that even having the systems in place doesn't necessarily mean that we're ready to teach, because we've got to have timetables that allow for physical distancing on occupancy of classrooms of 50%, Sakina.
And Professor, you know, what you've just said reinforces once again the inequalities in our system, because to say that schools that are ready can actually return and those that aren't should not, who knows how long that can take, and why is that acceptable? And the other question is whether the department knew way before yesterday, way before the 29th, that in fact schools were generally not ready to return. Why wasn't that judgment call made earlier? How much of this is a question of politics and ideology?
Well, my view is that I think that the chain of command is too long from top to bottom for the minister to get reliable information from the 26,000 schools in the country. She needs to be able to get accurate monitoring information from both the provinces, and I think she's now appointed independent monitoring people, and it's on the basis of those reports as well as the reports from the water boards that have led her to say that schools aren't ready. She needs to be able to work together with her unions, with their weekly surveys, together with her independent monitors, together with the provinces, and in the end to understand that information at the top is partial, and what we need is to trust our school communities, our school management teams to work within guidelines, to prepare for readiness and to demonstrate that readiness. But this confusion has been so sad for so many learners and so many families.
And just a final question, Professor Metcalfe, with regard to the Western Cape. Now, MEC Debbie Schaefer saying that they are ready to return and will indeed expect learners to return today. What's the situation with regard to that? Does the Western Cape actually enjoy the regulatory autonomy to make that decision and go ahead?
At the moment, I really believe that we may be following an overly legalistic response. What we want is for our children to be safe and in an environment where they're cared for, where they have access for school feeding. Where schools are ready to return to offer that safe space, I believe they should be allowed to. Now, Sakina, this is something that I'm still open to learning about, because there's many people that I respect who say that we have to open all of the schools at the same time. I think that we're in a situation where there's going to be so much variation across schools, particularly, by the way, because of timetabling, because to keep to a 50% occupancy, we're going to have many schools which the vast majority of schools where learners are not back all week. Schools are going to be places where learners come for some of the time and get some direction in terms of learning, get some opportunity to live a normal life, get some opportunity to re-establish social contact, get opportunity to access the school nutrition program. But the concept of a normal school year with a school calendar and normally covering the curriculum, that is way beyond us now. It has to be a much more localized response to care for children.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your insights. As always, education specialist Professor Mary Metcalfe giving us her views and analysis on the current situation with regard to the reopening of schools amid COVID-19. We're going to take a break.